everybody. So I'm just going to wait a couple seconds before we get started. We are talking about self-love today, and I'm happy to be with you all. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Saliha Afridi. I am a clinical psychologist and the managing director of the Lighthouse Arabia, which is a mental health and wellness center in Dubai. So today we are going to be talking about a topic which is so important, and a topic that I've actually personally struggled with a lot as well when it comes to just my journey with self-love. We confuse self-love with so many things, whether it's selfishness or self-indulgence or self-absorption or self-achievements and self-importance. There's so many selves in all of that that we actually don't know what self-love is. And I think that's not a strange thing, considering that most of us don't know what love is, and most of us have not experienced genuine love or real love. And there's always these conditions placed on love. And so it's pretty normal, I would say, for us to be confused about what love is and what self-love is, given that it has been sort of corrupted in media and because of media when it comes to what love is. So let's talk a little bit, and let's just jump right into it, and I'll take questions at the end. So I can see the questions here. So hold the questions until I say please ask questions, because then I will be able to lean in and look at what the screen says. So, why are we even talking about self-love? I think it's some of us feel a little bit hesitant when we think about that, because the world seems to be increasingly self-absorbed, increasingly, self-focused, and giving so much importance to self. Where selfies are the most taken sort of pictures globally. Everybody's quite, well, look at where I'm going, and look at what I'm eating, and look at what I'm wearing. And the self is a little bit, it's a little bit off-putting. And so why are we even talking about self-love in a world which seems increasingly self-absorbed or giving itself self-importance? And I really want to tease those two concepts apart. And so I want to talk about what is self-love. I want to talk about what is, how is it different from self-indulgence or self-importance. I want to talk about, is it selfish? Right? Is self-love selfish? And then I want to talk about, like, why is it important for you to have self-love? Like, what's the benefit of that? Because that's what the topic is today. But before I get into the topic, I want to actually talk about defining what self-love is. So let's just talk about the definition of self-love. Self-love is actually doing what is best for you versus what feels best in the moment. Now that's very different from what self-indulgence is, where self-indulgence is really going after the good feelings. Self-love actually looks at what is good for you in the long term. Now, self-love, if I could just give one word to what self-love is, it would be self-acceptance. Can you accept yourself as you are? Can you take the things that are good about you, the things that you're working on that are not so good, and can you come at them with love and compassion rather than judgment and criticism? Can you look at your happiness, your well-being as important, equally important than that of, other people? Because especially as women, but even with men, I work a lot with men, and they are also conditioned to care about others, protect others, feed others, care, do for others, achieve for others. So even they're conditioning is very much other focused, and we're all so defined by our roles. And so it's really about seeing yourself as a valuable person, seeing your needs as being valuable. Also, not more valuable, but valuable also. And that is what self-love is that I'm important also, and my needs are important also, and I'm good also, and I need to think about myself also, rather than just kind of over focus on the self. Now, that's quite different from selfishness. Selfishness is really where you are lacking consideration for other people. The definition, I actually had to Google selfish, because that's the thing that people throw out first. Like, oh, she's being so selfish, you know, she takes so much time for herself. Like, that's the first thing we do, is we start judging other people as being selfish if we find them caring for themselves. Or saying, hey, listen, I'm not going to come out tonight. I know it's an important day for you, but I'm really feeling overwhelmed and I need to take some time for myself. That sounds selfish for the person who is being sort of rejected in that moment. Like, how can you be so selfish and not come out with me for my birthday, or not come out for me for this important day? And so selfish is where you are lacking consideration for other people, and you are concerned chiefly with your own personal gain, okay, or your profit or your own pleasure. So it's concerned exclusively and excessively about yourself. That's very different from self-love, okay? That's when I say selfish, it's as if no one else exists and it's only me and I am the most important person. And that's not what self-love is. But it can feel like that in a world that constantly is putting you in a place where you are being judged in a role. So if I say, you know, I need 30 minutes to myself when I get home and I don't want to talk to my kids or my husband or my parents, I don't want to talk to anybody. To the kids, it might be, oh, my mom is being selfish. Or to my parents, it might be that my daughter is being selfish. Like, why isn't she thinking about us? So self-love can actually be seen as selfish through the eyes of the person judging you. And if you don't know who you are, and you don't know your values, and you don't know where you're operating from, you could internalize that as being selfish. Because look at anyone who has done anything great, from the prophets to the philosophers to the gurus. You will find that they left their whole world and they went into a cave up in a mountain, or they, went into the desert, and they took time for themselves to connect with their higher spirit, their God, their insight. They weren't able to do that amidst people, right? And so to the people, they might be like, oh my gosh, he's being so selfish. Why did he go up on that mountain? Or why did he leave us and went off into this cave? Like, to the people, it might seem selfish, but they knew their truth, the person who left. So unless you know your truth, unless you know your values, unless you're operating from that space, it is going to feel self-indulgent, or you might seem like, oh my God, I'm doing too much, I'm taking away from people. And people might call you selfish, and then you might actually feel selfish. So, and a very, very, very important part of self-love is self-awareness. So that's that. So that's basically the difference between self-love, selfish, self-indulgence, and self-acceptance, which is self-love. Now, what is self-care? Because a lot of people confuse self-care with self-love. There is so much on social media, on every magazine that talks about self-care. Care for yourself, care for yourself. But I'm sure all of you can actually think about times where you have shown care to someone that you don't love, right? We have given we have cared about. We might have gone into homeless shelters, or we might have done things in our workplace where we've cared about someone out of good, genuine kindness and humanity, but not love necessarily. Because love is much broader than that. I can say that I like a person, I like spending time with that person, but to love that person means I take the good, the not so good, I'm not going to call it bad, the good, the not so good, the annoying, the irritating, all of it. That's what love is. Enduring love is where I see you, all of you, I accept you. I don't necessarily want you to change. It'd be nice if you did change this bit, but I love you as you are. Love is different from care. Love is different from kindness. Love is much deeper than that, and it is all encompassing, where it sees the entirety of that being. A lot of times we get into a relationship and we think we're in love, but it's one layer of that, and it's basically where you are engaged with that person, you lose yourself in the other person, but then when they start to irritate you, you're like, yeah, no, not so much, I'm out of here. Like, not love, okay? The closest thing that I could say to people about love is the way you feel about your children, or maybe the way, not even parents, sometimes we disconnect from our parents, we leave our partners, we don't engage with our siblings, but when it comes to children, I think that is where, you know, if they're irritating you, there's a space inside of you where you still see them as good and whole, right? And they're not listening to you, but you still love them, and you still care for them, and you still show up for them, and you still accept them, and you still see good in them. That's love. So self-care is important. It's the way you show yourself every day that you are taking care of yourself. But love, self-love is really about accepting yourself and sometimes doing things that don't actually feel so good in the moment. Now, so that is a very clear distinction between self-love and self-care. I hope that was clear. If it's not clear, when I ask you about questions, please ask me and I will try to elaborate a bit more. Now, 3 things to know about self-love. 1, it doesn't always feel good. Just like if I tell my daughter, I need you to go brush your teeth and floss. In that moment, when she's watching her cartoons or whatever she's doing, it doesn't feel good. But am I coming from a place of dominating her? Am I coming from a place of being an authoritarian? No, I'm coming from a place of deep love and concern for her and her well-being. So go brush your teeth and get in bed, because sleep is important, and so is your dental hygiene and. So it doesn't feel good for her in that moment to go brush her teeth and go to bed, but it is love for herself that she is doing. And hopefully, if I repeat that behavior enough times, when she is no longer with me and she's off in college or whatever she's doing, she will have internalized that I need to look after my physical health as a way of self-love. So it doesn't always feel good, okay? Self-love almost has a layer of discipline. There's a discipline, and discipline comes from the Latin word disciple, which is to teach. It's almost like a teaching we have to do for ourselves. So we are performing from our highest self, and we're coming from our highest values. That's what love asks of us. You know, there are times when I really want to tell the person off in front of me, whether it's my partner, whether it's my kid, maybe my parents might be irritating me, but I hold a position of love and say, you know what, I'm gonna let this one ride. I'm gonna let this one go because I love her or I love him, and I'm not gonna pick this fight. I don't want to do this right now. So I come from a place of compassion, kindness, love in that moment. Although it would have felt good in that moment to sort of unleash, and then I would have just sort of relaxed. And actually science even shows that people who are sort of coming undone in front of people actually have less stress than those who are being unleashed upon. But it is not me and in my highest self. So one way I love myself and the other person in that moment is to hold that position of love and care and concern. So it also is self-love for myself. So that's what I mean by discipline. It is a discipline, and you do have to dig deep, because in the moment, what feels good may not be good for you in the long run, and it might not pass the pillow test, which is when you put your head down on the pillow, can you say to yourself that I lived my best life today? I did my best today. And if I tell people off, then I probably didn't. I lost it, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that self-love does require you to spend time with yourself, on yourself, to know yourself, to give to yourself what you need. So eventually you do know where your boundaries are, or when someone is crossing them. Now, there's everybody that is watching right now probably has one relationship where they avoid the person, or they feel resentful about the person. Like, I don't want to go near her like she's, or I don't want to. And in that relationship, you are not loving yourself, because you are not speaking your truth, and you are not clearly defining your boundaries. So if you find yourself feeling resentful, that is you saying, please draw the boundary for me. Please don't ask that much from me. Please don't demand so much from me. You're literally giving your power to the other person and saying, do the right thing. Just don't be so demanding. And the other person has no idea what your limits are. They just keep asking because you keep giving. And so they don't know that they've rubbed up against a boundary of yours. So I would really encourage you to think about where in your life are you feeling resentful, what relationships you feel taken for granted, or you feel resentful, or you feel taken advantage of. That's you not loving yourself. Because if you loved yourself in that moment, you would be able to say, you know what, I can't do this for you today, but on Saturday, I'll block some time for you, and we can do that on Saturday. You know your limits. So self-love cannot exist without you knowing yourself. Just like you can't love anything unless you know it. You cannot love anything unless you truly know it. Anything other than that is just infatuation. Enduring love is when you know that person and you stay with that person. And I would say the same thing goes for you. Enduring love is when I know myself and I see all the things that are not so good and so much shame that I might have to encounter. And then I say, and that too, I accept. And that too, I accept. Accept doesn't mean I act from that place, but that too I accept, and I want to understand. Judging it and shaming it is not helping. As a kid, I was a very angry kid. Imagine that. I would be angry a lot. I would lose my temper a lot. And so there was a lot of shame, because women aren't supposed to be angry and girls aren't supposed to be angry. And so I would be angry a lot. And there was a lot of things that would make me angry about the world, and I really acted those things out. And so I had a lot of shame regarding my anger. And a part of me, as I got older, I just split from that anger. So now it became internalized. Now I took the anger out on myself. And I'll talk a little bit about your relationship with the inner critic when it comes to that. And I really just took it out on myself. And I just avoided relationships, because I was like, if I get into a relationship and someone makes me upset, I'm going to lose it, and then I'm going to hurt that person. So to protect the other people and protect myself, I just avoided relationships where things got too deep. And that's how I managed my anger? Is it just I didn't trigger it? Let's just avoid anything. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of shame. And so as I was on my healing journey and my inner journey, I came upon this anger. And woof, I talk about this on my Instagram account, is that shame was disintegrating. I felt like I evaporated. With that shame, it was so engulfing and so overwhelming. Now, we all have something inside of ourselves that we're ashamed of and ashamed about. Showing love to that part of ourselves is what love is. Now, I would do the same for my partner and my husband, my colleagues, my children, that I see that this is something that you're not proud of and I love you. Now, also, like that, most people don't do. Most people say, oh, I don't like this, I'm out of here. And that's what we do with ourselves. So knowing yourself and healing and showing compassion and care and kindness and gentleness to the part of you that you are ashamed of is part of self-love, okay? And then thirdly is self-love includes doing what we aren't necessarily conditioned to do. So much of our self-worth, and now I'm talking about men and women, because I do know that women have a lot of conditions placed on them and a lot of biases that they contend with, but patriarchy is just as anti-men as it is anti-woman when it comes to what it expects from them. There's a lot of demands placed on us as human beings, men and women. I have 2 daughters and I have 2 sons, and I see that both of them, all 4 of them, both of these groups here in front of me are struggling with their own expectations that they have internalized according to what society expects. Society expects, men to not prioritize themselves. You should prioritize your family. You should prioritize making an income and providing for them. You should prioritize protecting the people in your life. That's who you prioritize. Where is the self in that? Not there. Women, we have to take care of our children. We have to take care of our families. We have to manage all sorts of other things. But where is myself in that? Not very present. So we are all contending with something. So it's not like men have it better than women, women have it better than men. When it comes to this domain, at least, when it comes to self-love, there's no space for us. And so it actually will feel really awkward in the beginning because the world isn't set up this way. Our systems aren't set up this way to say, are you taking care of yourself? And are you being good to yourself? Are you showing, are you worthy in yourself? Are you good in yourself? Like without you having to do something. No, all of us are defined by our roles. And so this is where I think, it will feel awkward, and it's not necessarily according to our conditioning. Our conditioning is that we are defined by our roles. And that's not so good. That doesn't feel very good. That if I wasn't doing anything, would I be good? Am I still worthy? If I wasn't a mother, if I wasn't a wife, if I wasn't a daughter, if I wasn't a colleague, if I wasn't a community member, would I still be of worth? And most people would say, no, your worth is defined by your roles. And the same thing goes for men. And so, am I worthy? Am I valuable? That's what love is. And guys, it is not easy. Let me tell you, this is not easy to do. Just like love is not easy. Love is hard. Love is, loving another person is hard. You have to sacrifice a lot for the other person at times when they need you. And then you're not caring for yourself. and you're not considering yourself, but the other person needs you right now. So you give them everything you've got. And we've all done that. And there is no shame in that. That is love too. So love is often doing the hard things, but it asks of us our highest values, I think. And so the next thing I want to talk about is that, is self-love important if you want to be in a healthy relationship? And it is. Self-love is very important for relationships, because if we are not loving ourselves, we are putting a lot of pressure on the other person to meet our needs. There is no one relationship that can carry all of that. And they shouldn't have to. You know, I often think about my children, and you know, there's a lot of mothers and fathers who say, I gave up my whole life for you, and now you must give up your life for me. And I don't come from that school. I think that there should be love and care and consideration for each other, but no one needs to be sacrificing their lives for me. That's not why I had children. You know, that's not what they owe me. They didn't ask to be born, right? And so we put a lot of pressure on the other person to meet our needs when we are not meeting our own needs. If my mom ever said that to me, which she never has, but I would have said, well, I didn't ask to be born. You chose that. So why? I don't owe you anything. In fact, you owe me because you brought me into this world, right? And so putting all these other people above and ahead of ourselves and sacrificing ourselves to nothingness only puts pressure on these relationships. So you must consider yourself. And I imagine that if I was a mother who self-sacrificed everything for my children, then I might say those things. I might say, you owe me now because I gave up my life for you. But I won't give up my life for them. And I think they deserve a whole mother. A mother who is a daughter and a wife and a friend and a community member and a business owner and. They deserve the entirety of me. And that means that they have to accept all of that, and that I won't always be there necessarily. I will be there definitely when it's most important, and definitely every day in some way or another. But I will care for myself, and I give you permission to care for yourself too. So that's how it's super, super important in relationships, because when we are not caring for ourselves, we burden our relationships. And we put pressure on our relationships that they didn't ask for. And this goes for romantic relationships and familiar relationships and. So the second thing is, when you have self-love, you know your worth, you know your boundaries, you know your values, you know what you'll put up with, you know when you will walk away. There are some values that when those lines are crossed, you say this is the end of this relationship. So you can love the person, but you don't have to necessarily be in that relationship with that person, right? And so when you have self-love and you know your worth, you know what you will put up with. And I think that's really important in relationships. Because a lot of us will put up with a lot of things thinking that we're loving the other person. You might be loving the other person, but you're not loving yourself. And that is an unequal relationship. So what are my limits? What are my boundaries? What are my values that are most important to me? And if these are not met, these needs are not met, then I walk away. And I have self-worth to know that I exist outside of this relationship, and I'm okay. And I love you, but I don't want to be with you. I care about you, and I accept that you have these needs and you want these things in a relationship. I just don't want those things. So I'm not like coming at it with like, oh my God, you're such a bad person, you can't meet my needs. No, they have their needs and their worth and their boundaries, and I have my needs, my worth, and my boundaries. You're not bad, you're not worse, you're not better, you're just different. Another way self-love shows up in relationships is that you take ownership for your needs. So if I need something from you, I'm going to say, I need this from you. Now, say that out loud as you guys are listening to me. I need you to blank. And most people will be like their throats will clench up and they'll be like, oh, I can't say that, because so much guilt shows up. Now we need to talk about, this is a layer of self-love that we need to now integrate, which is I can ask for support. And no, that doesn't make me needy. And no, that doesn't make me codependent. It makes me interdependent. And that's who we are as people. We need to depend on each other. We need to count on each other. We need to ask of each other. There is a give and take in relationships. And when I need support, it's okay for me to ask. And that's how self-love shows up sometimes, is that you ask for help when you need it. And that's really hard for a lot of people, men and women both. Another way self-love shows up is that you will be able to receive love. How many times, and think about this, right? How many times has someone said, oh, I really like your shirt, or oh, you look so good today, or that was a really great presentation, and immediately you're like, oh, you look good too, or well, I had a lot of help, and you almost can't take the compliment. Not almost, you can't take the compliment. And that has to be because there's no space inside of you, right? For you to be able to say thank you. That's it. When someone says you look good, or you have your hair looks good, or whatever, I don't know, what else, your house looks beautiful, or your designs are great. For you to be able to say thank you, and just soak in that moment for a second, savor that moment. Ooh, that needs love. That needs love. So it will not resonate. It will not penetrate. It will not, you will not engage with it deeply. You will resist it. You will push it by deflecting or giving credit to everybody else, because there's no space inside of you for that. So self-love actually allows you to receive love. When I love myself, I create space for other people to love me. And it is their right to love me, just as it is my right to love them. So oftentimes we don't allow the people in our lives to love us. Or we don't want to burden them, and we don't want to ask of them, and we do all of these things. But we actually are taking away one of their rights. And one of their rights is to show love to us. So, there's people, like, if you give them a gift and immediately, like, the next day they've, like, delivered flowers to your house. It's like they don't let you love them. And that's because they don't love themselves. And so if you do that, then now you know where your work is. That to just say, I allow and I receive with thanks. And that's it. And if someone says, I love you, now I've started saying, thank you. I feel your love. Instead of saying, I love you too, which is an immediately deflecting of their love. Sometimes we do that. Like, I love you, you love me, now we're equal, moving on. But now I say, I receive your love, and I feel your love, and I am so grateful for your love. And in that moment, that person's heart expands, my heart expands, and love is in the air, right? And so think about what you do when someone says, I love you. And what if you said, thank you for your love, and I feel your love, and I'm grateful for your love? Would you feel uncomfortable? That's where your work is. So that's that. Now, where do I begin this self-love? Okay, so like any loving relationship, you're in it for the long run, okay? This is not, okay, self-love month, February. No. great to initiate the journey in February. Great to make a commitment, just like you get married, but then there's the wedding and then there's the marriage, right? And it has its ups and downs and backs and forths and closeness and furtherness, and that's what a normal marriage looks like. That's what you're doing to yourself. When you make a commitment and say, I commit to love myself, you're in it for the long run. This is not something you do over a weekend or in a workshop or, journal for 4 minutes a day. This is where I am with you. I will hear you. I'm committed to you. You are important to me. And I will value what you have to say every step of the way. That's the commitment you're making. And then you're gonna, there'll be moments where you drift from yourself and then you come back to yourself and then you drift. And that's part of love. Just like it's part of a marriage, that's part of the inner marriage. Inner marriage with all parts of you. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what do you want? Do you know what you want? I remember I asked this question a few years ago to a woman, and she just sort of looked at me sort of blankly, and she was like, what do you mean, what do I want? Like, no one's ever asked me that. What do I want? I don't know what I want. All right, that's where we begin. What do you want? What gets, what excites you? What nourishes you? What hurts you? What inspires you? These are some of the questions that we're going to start to do. As you would start in a relationship with any human being, these are the questions we do when we start going off and doing our dating scene. We start asking these questions, right? What do you want? What do you like? What do you enjoy? What do you not like? What type of movies do you like? And just because you asked yourself these questions like 4 years ago or 5 years ago or 15 years ago doesn't mean that you can't ask yourself. I ask myself every day, what do you like? Because I change. I am so different from what I was pre-COVID. I'm so different from what I was a year ago, 6 months ago. Even in October, I was a different person. And so if you are on this journey of self-discovery and self-awareness, you are going to evolve. And so you have to constantly be checking in with yourself. What do you want? Is this interesting to you? Is this something you need right now? And it shifts. It shifts. Just like, one day your kid's super into eating broccoli and the next day maybe they're not. And so it shifts. And then maybe they come back to eating broccoli. And we need to be constantly checking with ourselves as to what is important to us. And when a project comes up or an invitation comes up, ask yourself, is this something you need to do right now? Is this something you want to do right now? If you don't go right now, what values are you exercising? If you do go right now, what values are you exercising? Because there are always some values that we're exercising. If I visit my sick aunt, I am self-sacrificing in that moment because maybe I'm just exhausted and I don't really want to see anybody right now, but I'm choosing humanity and love and kindness for her over, self-care for myself in that moment. You're always going to be contending with some values. So it's pretty normal. It's okay to name the values and say, I choose the highest. And for me, kindness is my highest value. If it's kind, I'm going to go for it. Like, that's the one I'm going to choose. It's not self-care and it's not any of these things. If it's kind, I'm going to go in that direction. It's a good compass for me. So write down the values of what values you would be exercising if you do that, and what values would you be exercising if you don't do that. So that's a good way to start building a relationship with yourself, okay? To just become aware of what you want, like, inspire, etc., etc. The second thing I would say is nourish your body. That's the first way. When a baby comes into the world, we nourish the baby. The only way the baby knows love is if it's being held, if it's being fed, if it's being wrapped in a blanket, if it's being coddled, if it's being cuddled. This is how a baby knows love. Go back. We're super simple as human beings, guys, sometimes we overcomplicate things. Are you doing even the basic things? Are you sleeping enough? Are you eating the right things? Are you moving enough? All the things that we're so like, hyper vigilant about when it comes to our children, are you doing that? I'm so paranoid about my kids eating healthy food, but are you living on Doritos and granola bars? Like, think about that. So just start with that. Just super basic things. Am I nourishing my body? Am I just quickly taking a shower, or am I bathing myself the way I would bathe my child, right? Is there a love in that? The way I bathe myself, the way I would bathe my child? Gentle, playful. Am I doing that, or and moving on? And so do that. That would be the second thing. The third thing I would say is healing your relationship with your body. When you look in the mirror and you're like, I don't like this stretch mark, or I don't like that wrinkle, or my hair, and like, is this what you say to yourself? What if you saw a human being, and every single time you saw that human being, they pointed out every single thing that was wrong with you? You would not want to be hanging out with that human being. That's it. I don't care how much they love you. You can love me all you want. That ain't love. It doesn't feel like love. So change the way you speak to yourself and about yourself. And this is where the inner critic comes in. And I think your relationship to your inner critic is going to be a very important element of this journey of self-love. I like my inner critic. I remember when I was like, I need to do something about this mean person inside my head, and I'm Googling and reading, and everyone is saying, banish the inner critic and annihilate the inner critic and silence the inner critic. Guys, self-love is even about loving the inner critic. Okay? Now, that's what I'm talking about. It's doing the hard stuff. It's super easy for me to silence things and compartmentalize and split off, but that's not love. If I silence one part of me, it's still me that I am silencing. And frankly speaking, that inner critic came online when I was a kid, and it was like, hey, listen, man, you've got to set the bar high and you've got to perform. So this perfectionism and that inner critic came from a good place. And I need to go back to that place. And I need to talk to that inner bully and just make it my friend. And so I did that. And sometimes it comes on and, oh God, what are you thinking? Like, it'll come on and take a deep breath and say it nicely. Speak kindly. And I actually will do this kind of active imagination where the inner critic will be sitting in front of me, and I will actually say, tell me, what is it that you want? Why? What are you getting all worked up for? As I would to a tantrum throwing child, I would not silence that child because it would just get louder, okay? So I actually would sit with the inner critic and say, all right, I hear you, I see you, let me hear what you've got to say. And then the inner critic says, well, listen, man, like, you really needed to study hard for that, and you didn't. And now you dropped the ball and you've let down your team. You're right, I did. And I will now call and apologize. And I hear you, and I've learned my lesson. And so thank you for bringing that up. And hopefully next time I won't do it. Actually, let me put it in the schedule next time when the next presentation is, so I'm prepared. Done. The inner critic had a valuable message for me. Okay? Listen to the message. And if the inner critic is like, no, your dinner party has to be perfect, or your table settings have to be perfect, because that's where my inner critic is most loud, because that's where I'm most insecure, is domestic duties are not my forte. And so this is where my inner critic is most loud. So your inner critic will be loudest in the places where you are most insecure. That's where you say, okay, tell me where you're going with this. And speak kindly to the inner critic, and it will speak kindly back to you. And then it becomes your inner guide rather than the inner critic. And And that is how you integrate all those split up parts of you, and that's where you expand more and more. And that's the journey of self-love. So self-love, like any other love, is a lifelong commitment. It's about doing the hard things. It's about befriending the parts that are really scary and that are really not nice. It's about all of that. And if you ever wonder what self-love is, think about how you love other people. That's just basically what you need to be doing for yourself. And I know it sounds super cheesy, by the way. And as a mother of 4 children, 3 of them who are teenagers, I tell you, there is not a lot of time in my day to self-care. I don't have a lot of time. I wake up early, and my self-care is like going to bed on time. Like, that to me is self-care. Like, I'm good if I have my 7.5 hours of sleep. I feel super good. Self-care, check, done. And in the morning, while I'm having my coffee, I wear a face mask. That's my self-care. When I'm in the shower, I make sure that I'm like, loving myself and being playful with myself. That's how I show. And that's it. It's 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 5 minutes there. That's it. These long sort of spaces of massages and baths, I don't have time for. So keep it super real when it comes to self-care. But it's about making a commitment to knowing yourself deeply and being there for yourself deeply. And when someone is hurting you, you stand up for yourself. Truly. That's what love is. That's how you would love your child. That's how you would love your partner. That's how you would love your friend. That's what love is. So now I can take some questions, and I would be happy to answer them. I'm going to sort of lean in here. Oh gosh. Actually, maybe, yeah. I don't see any questions as of right now. Yeah, I mean that, I'm not, like, we need to know that a lot of the research and the education is coming out of individualistic societies. That, if your father wants to come over, call him and tell him not to come over. Try that with my dad. That ain't gonna fly. And so it is going to be where you are being true to your values also. And so I might say to my dad that, listen, on Tuesday night, I'm like super exhausted. So how about we meet on Thursday night? Like, I might do it that way. But for me, my values are kindness and respect and, community, which is a very collectivistic value system versus the individualistic value system. And the collectivistic value system does say that we put the group above our self-needs, right? Now, as long as it's not betraying myself, I am okay to sacrifice in that moment. And there is a big difference between self-betrayal and self-sacrifice. And sometimes these things get a little bit confusing for people. When I betray myself, that's when basically if someone is saying, you should go be a lawyer, and my father really wants me to be a lawyer, and he really wants me to be a lawyer, and I really don't want to be a lawyer, and I say, okay, fine, I'll go be a lawyer. That to me is a betrayal because it's not my truth. So I will need to have a difficult conversation with my father at that point. But if my father says, hey, listen, can you take me to the doctor's tonight? I don't really want to go by myself. I'm exhausted. I am tired. You know what? Sure, Dad, I'll take you to the doctor. That's self-sacrifice. It's momentary. It did something for him. I sacrificed myself in that moment. My self-pleasure, that's not self-indulgent. It is holding my highest values and saying, sure, Dad, I'll take you, and I will do it happily, not holding it over his head and reminding him every other day, look at how much I do for you. And that's it. And so sacrifice has to be part of a long-term healthy relationship. It just can't be betrayal. Betrayal is your truth. And that's very different. If someone told me, for example, someone told me you can't work. That would be a deal breaker for me. Like if my husband, before we got married, told me you cannot work, I don't want you to work. Like for me personally, now for my sister, not so much, but for me personally, this is just my energy, my dreams, my aspirations are that I want to work. I want to contribute in a society in a different way, right? My mother, not so much. She would be so, okay, no problem. And it would not be a self-betrayal for her. So that's where you really need to know yourself and your truth if you're going to draw any boundary. If you're drawing boundaries based off of what your friend is saying, oh my God, I can't believe you have to take your father out, or based on what your husband is saying, or based on what you read on Instagram as to what boundary setting is, then you're going to be really lost. You really need to know yourself if you want to set proper boundaries, your personal values, and then stand by that. And then say, I sacrifice. Now, it's okay. I'm going to sacrifice. So I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
That goes with the other question. I'm a person who never say no because
Yeah.
it doesn't make them happy with myself.
Yeah.
So how can I practice putting myself first in the situation?
Yeah. I think it's really important that when you say yes to someone else, so this was something that really put things in perspective for me, especially as a mother, as a working mother. When I say yes to something, what am I saying no to? And that was like, ooh. I'm saying no to time with my kids. I'm saying no to time for myself. I'm saying no to time with my family. I'm saying no to something. If I take this project, because at some point in your life, you will be saying yes to everything. And that's okay. Maybe that's part of a life phase where we're just exploring things. And you say yes. And I said yes to everything. And at some point, the cost became higher because now, as I say yes to something, I'm saying no to something else. So if I say yes to being here, I'm saying no to something at work. Can I say no to that? Yeah, I can say no, I'm going to be here. So you're always evaluating what you are saying no to. And if that means you're saying no to yourself and no to what you want and no to what you love, then you move into the space of betrayal. And really, I think considering yourself, but also knowing that self-sacrifice in moments is okay, but not your MO for like for life. You cannot become a martyr or self-sacrificing human being and tend to yourself not at all. That becomes selfless. And selfless meaning you have no self. And you want to have a sense of self. You want to have a place where you are guarding and protecting something inside of you too. But that, again, all of this, I'm talking here, underneath all of this is you have to know yourself. You have to spend time with yourself. You have to really understand yourself. Understand your limits. My limits are very different from my colleagues' limits, from my sister's limits, from my mother's limits. I have different limits. I know my limits. I'm going to push my limits sometimes, and I know I'm pushing my limits. And then I'm going to rest because I know I need that. So it is an inside job. It really is operating from the inside out. How would you recover your faith in anything after a huge betrayal? Compassion, gentleness. You might need the support of another person at that time because you don't trust your own judgment. So maybe having a therapist that you work with that can remind you of who you are, or a friend that can remind you of who you are. So you might need to work with someone when there is a self-betrayal that has happened. Like, what happened? How did I get there? How did I lose myself so much? We all will do it. We will all lose ourselves at some point, guys. So this is not like, oh my God, you're a really horrible person because you betrayed yourself. Hello, welcome to the club of the 7.7 billion people who have lost themselves at some point. But can you find yourself again? And you might need the help of someone, and that's okay. So having compassion for that part of yourself, but also being curious as to how you got there. So you don't find yourself in the same place again, because history tends to repeat itself unless you learn the lesson. So learn the lesson and integrate the learning. That becomes wisdom. And wisdom is a whole series of experiences that went wrong. That's what wisdom is. But that's not because they went wrong. It's because you actually sat and you wondered and you pondered and you integrated and you learned, this is where I went wrong, this is where I went right, this is to where I need to make a U-turn. All of that is part of life. Life is not meant to be this perfect thing. It has its ups and downs, but how do you show up for yourself with compassion each time? There's one other question. Ignore. Ignore. It doesn't matter what people say. You can take it as feedback. That's it. Feedback is one perspective. I would be curious. I would say, well, what do you mean by that? What would it look like if I was loving myself? And then maybe you will see how they do self-love. But for you, it might be very different, because someone who sees me exhausted and burnt, like at the end of the day, not burnt out, but just like finished, and they see me saying, oh, actually, I'm going to take my mom to the grocery store now. They might say, well, no, you need to love yourself more. And I would say, go fly a kite, because I am loving myself right now. I am sacrificing for my mother because she likes it when I go grocery shopping with her, but that doesn't mean I don't love myself. I accept this. That's what love is. So if someone, just because they say something doesn't mean it's true. It's just their perspective. You have to know why you're doing things. So when things come at you and people judge you, because some people have told me I'm selfish because I worked and I had little kids and, oh, that's so selfish. Okay, but I knew why I was doing it. I wasn't doing it because it was a compulsion in me. It was something I needed to do. It was not something I could silence inside of me. So maybe to them it looked selfish, like I said, but to me, I was operating from my truth. And that was not selfish. It was my truth. It was authenticity. So just because someone says something doesn't mean it's true. You have to know why you're doing it and stress test that a little bit.
I think we have a lot of questions, but we can also always have
Yeah.
So just in summary, what advice would you give in 2 words for mothers like us who work and who are sometimes overwhelmed, even if they're not working, the whole job description of the mother. So in 2 words, what is your advice for?
I don't think I can do anything in 2 words. But I would just say, do you know yourself? That's 4. 4 words. Do you know yourself? Start there. And that's the beginning of the most important loving relationship that you will have, is the relationship you have with yourself.
I think that's a question everyone should ask today, now.
I want to know me. I want to know me. Let's start there. Thanks, guys. Thanks for being here.